Welcome to episode 46 of Called to the Bar, International Law Over Drinks. I'm your host, Douglas Guilfoyle, Professor of International Law and Security at UNSW Canberra. This week we have a very special episode, one recorded live at Symposium Bar and Restaurant at the Australian National University as a side event at the Australian and New Zealand Society of International Law annual conference here in chilly and slightly damp Canberra. This evening I'm joined by an all-star panel drawn from our core cast of co-hosts, Tamsin Phillipa Paige, Associate Professor at Deakin Law School and Tech Wizard for the evening, or Wizardess, or which, as we please. DJ Dr. Sin, yes, okay, great. Imogen Saunders, Associate Professor at ANU Law, and Dr. Juliette McIntyre, Senior Lecturer at the University of South Australia. We also have as a special guest one of the collaborators in the At the Vanishing Point project on material culture and international law, Professor Jessie Hohmann of the University of Technology, Sydney. Professor Emily Crawford of the University of Sydney sends her apologies. Qantas lost her luggage and she had to drive back to Sydney to get it. So tonight's topic is methodology in international law scholarship. What is it? Is it even possible? Why does it freak lawyers out so much to talk about it? And as Danish Sheikh once put it in a semi-viral video, do we all just need to calm down? But before we begin, our traditional first question to the panel, noting the hour on a Wednesday and that we are physically in a bar, albeit that means some of our panel members are masking. What's your drink? Now, wait for the awkwardness as I have to physically pass the microphone around. Imogen.
Thank you, Doug. I'm going to alleviate the awkwardness somewhat by introducing not just my drink, but yours and Juliette's as well. I'm drinking a very nice Riesling, and Juliette and Doug are both having the Chardonnay, which I'm informed is a very nice glass of wine indeed.
Terrific. Jessie?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've chosen the Alicante Boucher, which I chose purely because it is South Australian, and so am I. And I note it was on the white list. For those, I know this is a podcast, but it's a beautiful rose colour.
As usual, we do visual gags on this podcast and constantly hold things up to the microphone. Tamsin?
Well, I have a COVID vulnerability, so I have a mask on and I am not having a drink as a result.
Very sensible, if somewhat regrettable. All right. Look, before we get into it, we have some traditional questions that we usually start new guests with. So, Jessie, that's you. I'll boil it down so we don't run for our usual hour and a half and the crowd gets restless and starts throwing furniture. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into international law and what career path brought you to your present job?
Thank you, Doug. I wish I would have a more exciting answer or more non-traditional answer to this question. I think I came to international law in quite a standard way, which was I did a PhD which had an international law aspect to it. At the time, I don't think I fully understood international law, and I'm not sure I understand it fully still, which is what keeps me going in it, because there's always something new to look at, something new to understand. I did my PhD in the UK and was there for 13 years before coming back to Australia, just beating COVID back to Australia, and I've found a very happy home at UTS in the law faculty there since.
Terrific. And yes, I recall that 13 years in the UK as we were at the same institution, and there are other people from our PhD cohort in the room. So for the younger post-PhD scholars here, this is the kind of fate that awaits you. Sorry. Right, so on to the main event, methodology. Lawyers are usually bad at articulating their methodology and are frequently frightened at the mere prospect of having to do so for grant applications and the like. The number of legal projects with a clearly articulated methodology are relatively few. At the Vanishing Point is an exception. So before we open the general discussion, in the absence of Emily, Jessie, you've got to carry everything. Could you tell us about the present project on the history of dining and drinking at the United Nations and how this relates, if at all, to previous projects such as the excellent volume Objects of International Law, which I note I would call excellent even if I didn't have a chapter in it?
Thank you. Yes, so I suppose we've already had a keynote today on the history. What is the history of a research interest or how we do our research? So what is the history of this International Laws Objects project and the At the Vanishing Point? So you mentioned this International Laws Objects project, and I suppose several years before I left the UK, I was looking around and thinking that we really just have such a narrow vision in international law. We're looking at a very narrow range of sources. We're looking at a very narrow range of materials. So we're looking almost entirely at the printed page. And I just felt like that wasn't capturing everything that was happening, and that we needed to look up and we needed to look out and we needed to look around. And as an international lawyer, you can become sort of, obsessive about international law, to put it mildly, but I can see international law in everything around me, and I can kind of put that international law lens on the wine that we're drinking, on the import restrictions on the timber that we're sitting around. And I thought, what if we could collect and ask about some of those reflections that people have on all the other ways that they see international law in the world around them. And that collaboration with Daniel Joyce, who is here in the room tonight, led to the International Law's Objects book, which a number of you have been involved in, which just asked, what object speaks to you about international law, or how will you let international law speak through an object instead of through a text? And that was a jumping off point and was conceived really as an invitation to think about international law more broadly and through different sources or different ways of engaging with the world. So that was a great project, and it was an invitation and an opening up, I think. Dan and I both thought of that. And then when I got back to Australia, the International Law's Objects Project had an incredibly serendipitous meeting with the International Law Collection of Emily Crawford. So Emily is really the driving force behind the At the Vanishing Point project, which also involves Daniel Joyce and Jacqueline Mowbray and myself. But it's Emily's collection of amazing objects that she has curated, collected, and thought about over time, that allows, I guess, us to take this methodology, this looking at international law through objects or its material culture further.
Speaking of those objects, I just have to tell a brief story, which is that Emily and I have never actually met in person, but I do happen to be the very proud owner of a stamp from Gabčíkova Nadžimaros that she very kindly sent me in the mail one day, and the postcard it was attached to just said, "From one international law nerd to another." It's one of my most prized possessions, so it fits well with the objects.
Adding to that story, those listening to the podcast might recall an episode we recorded a week or two back with Professor Tim Stevens, who talked about a bottle of water that Emily had given him that came from Itu Aba. Of course, the islet/rock at dispute in the South China Sea arbitration.
Which was given for the purpose of proving that it could be inhabited by humans and therefore is an island, not a rock. So, material culture is important. Right, okay, so though this be method, yet there be madness in it, to misquote Hamlet. Juliette, I'm going to go back to you because you most recently completed a PhD. What struggles did you have with method, and why do you hate the word ontology so much?
Yeah, I'm very prejudiced. I also really despise the word epistemology. And the reason is
Both
that
of them translate to wanker.
So this is the thing, right? I don't understand what those words mean. And maybe that's a me problem. But I am taken back to...
Isn't your former supervisor standing behind you? Is this something you should be confessing?
She's behind me. It's one of those, it's like a meme. But I will come to my supervisors in a moment and the way that they saved me. And I really was going to do that. But here's the thing. So I attended in my early PhD era a very well-meaning and I'm sure quite brilliant seminar as part of the general research training things that you do for PhD students. And it was on methodology, and it was on ontology, and it was on and it was talking about all of these things. I had no idea what was going on. And I really tried to take every note possible and to make sense of it. And then I went away very studiously and I tried to integrate this language into my PhD because I was like, well, I guess, is that what I'm doing, or am I doing that one? And I felt like it was a series of categories that I needed to pick from in order to be validly doing research. Because especially coming from a practice background as I do, I didn't feel well versed in the language of scholarship. And I thought, well, using these big words will give it the validity that it requires. And obviously this is what you're supposed to do. And the positive out of it was that Hilary and Margaret very gently said to me, no, don't do that. But they actually freed me from having to engage with some of this language, saying basically just go and explore. And so that then led me to this kind of turning into a bit of a methodology anti, but we can get into that. I started to think, okay, let's just conceive of what I'm doing as just wandering around looking at stuff. Kind of, here's a little something over here. Oh, US court stuff. Okay, that's interesting. You do that procedure over here. Oh, some cases. I'm going to go look at those. And then just slowly weaving it together and not necessarily coming to my project with a preconceived notion of what it was that I was going to do. And so I think that's where my methodology resistance comes in. It's not that explaining what you have done is bad, but that constraining yourself to a particular method before you embark on your journey is very limiting. If you're just going to follow a pathway that someone else has already set, well, where's the novelty and where's the interest in that? You know, you've got to get off the pathway to discover the other interesting things. So yeah, I hate them because I don't understand them.
So Juliette, I agree entirely, and I also like to think about the Objects Project and the At the Vanishing Point project as, you know, let's just have a look, let's just open our eyes and think about it. But it does have its downsides, because the first time I ever presented my work on the Objects Project, I made this presentation about looking at international law through objects, and the first question was, someone at the very back of the room put up her hand and said, "Does this mean we need to take an actor network theory approach?" And I had never heard of actor network theory because I was not taking a methodology or whatever, and I was just doing my own looking around. And I said, "Oh, I don't think so. I think it just means," well, I don't remember what I said, but this is the limitation of the just looking around, is that somebody else will have thought of that and called it a methodology and will then want to apply that to you. So it does have its risks.
So, Tamsin, you have, apart from your persona as DJ Dr. Sin, a self-confessed superhero persona as Method Girl. What is methodology? Why does it matter? And why does it freak lawyers out so much?
All right, I'm going to start with the why does it freak lawyers out so much? And this is going to go back to how Rob McLaughlin, who's standing at the back there, describes his method, which is, I just read some stuff and think about it. And that's fine. And we have all gone through law school, and we're all taught this is how you be a lawyer. And that's a method, but we're taught as if this is this natural law that just is just law, and that's natural and normal, and that's what we do. But that's actually just a method. It's the doctrinal legal method. You take the law, you put it in the context of the facts that it's being applied to, and you apply it according to a set of rules, be it the object and purpose, the ordinary meaning, all of these things. That's a method, and that's the method we're taught is law. And because we've all been taught since law school that that's just law, we don't think of it as a method, we just think of it as doing law. And so that's why it freaks lawyers out, is that they hear this, we've got to do method, and they're like, well, I don't know what you mean by method, I just do the law. And that's just it's a lack of proper education, frankly, and it's the arrogance of law to treat itself as this siloed special thing. Because I can tell you right now that doctrinal legal method, if you change your sources from law to something else, is exactly the same as critical discourse analysis. It's exactly the same. Critical discourse analysis, you take your text, you place it in the context of when the text was created, and you read it to get meaning. That's it. And so the issue of why does it freak lawyers out is because lawyers are really badly educated. They have the one method that we've been taught since law school is taught as it's just doing law. There is no method, it's just the law. When that's not true. We all know when we're marking student papers and everything, or when we're going through court submissions or anything like that, we need to show our working of how we got to a conclusion. That's method. That's method. And this is why I come to what is method? Method is the how question about research. It is how are you doing your research? How have you made your decisions to do that? So the just looking around, that's a method. That's a how am I doing this? Well, I'm looking for sources that are relevant, and I'm reading them in the context that they exist, and I'm interpreting them, or however. That's a method. And so anything like this it's a method. It's how you articulate how you have done your research and how you have reached your conclusions and how you have conducted your analysis. And the why does it matter? Well, if you can tell your readers or your examiners or whoever, depending on context, how you've done your research, it allows you to do some really powerful things. It forces your readers to read your research on your terms. It allows you to set the terms of the research actively, rather than allowing your reader to set the terms in which they're going to interpret your work. Because it allows you to define the scope. It allows you to say, this is what's in, this is what's out, and this is why. And that's the big question. That's the big important thing. It's the this is why. It cuts off reviewer 2 saying, well, I would have done this and you haven't, so your work fucking sucks. And that's reviewer 2, and it preempts that reviewer 2 question. And so it doesn't matter what your method is. It doesn't matter whether it's doctrinal legal analysis. It doesn't matter whether it's a theoretical reading, analysis reading. It doesn't matter if it's just, I'm going to read some stuff and then analyze it. If you can articulate what you've done and why, you are allowing your reader to understand how you have reached your conclusions more clearly, which then allows them to understand your biases. So it allows them to read in light of your biases that you're bringing to your research, because you're articulating that. It minimizes the ability of readers to willfully misinterpret or accidentally misinterpret what you're doing and why. It allows you to define the terms of your work in a way that's saying, I'm just doing law, doesn't give you that ability to do so, because if you're just doing law without articulating the real details on it, on that method of law, someone can come along and say, well, I wouldn't have made that interpretive decision and therefore you're wrong.
Okay, so my question is, I don't think we disagree about that at all. But I think one of the problems I have is the way that methodology is used as a starting point, especially for PhD researchers. It's often the case that PhD students are told, oh, well, you have to go off and articulate your method, even as part of your research plan or project. And I feel like, as you point out, we're not necessarily trained particularly well in how to do that. But also that can be really quite limiting. It can potentially prevent the scholar from actually finding something really new and interesting if they feel beholden to the previously articulated methodology. So when do you articulate it, I think, is one of the issues. Do you do it in a backward sense, looking on what you've done, or do you do it looking forwards? Okay,
so you do it both. Like, you have a basic starting premise that you think you're going to work to, but it needs to be flexible. You can update your method. You can decide that actually this is not working and change things. And you can then also rewrite it, looking backwards as well. But you need to have some idea of what you're doing. Not a hard and fast, it must be this, but more like guidelines than actual rules.
I had no idea what I was doing. I got to be honest with you.
I look, and that by the by, but some idea. You knew what you were working on. You knew your question. You knew that. That's part of method. Having some idea allows you to then adapt as you discover new things. It's not, you don't lock yourself in at the beginning point, but you give yourself a framework to work from. It's not setting out the hard and fast rules. It's giving yourself a general set of frameworks to work from, to then do the research and to then go, okay, I've discovered something new. How do I adapt? And so, yeah, I would say that it's you write it up at the end, but you have a general idea. And your general idea was, I'm just going to go read some stuff. I'm going to look around. And that's fine. That's a method. That's literally a method. That's fine. And you update it and adapt. And so, I've had many methods, but yeah.
So I would just add to this debate slightly to say that I think that method and methodology is also a gatekeeper, right? People use it as a gatekeeper, right? To exclude things and perhaps that The question I got at that conference about, well, isn't this just action network theory, was putting me in my place, right? And I think as a PhD student, or perhaps an outsider scholar, if you are an Indigenous scholar and your sources of law are fundamentally different from international law sources in the Western canon, then, that question itself, that statement, what is your methodology, can function as a gatekeeper. And in that sense, it can be fundamentally problematic. By the way, I do know now that action network theory is more of a method than a theory.
I've got to say, I think one of the most illuminating things I've heard so far in the conversation that I'm about to throw to Imogen is Tamsin's observation that this is about defining the terms for your reader. Actually, that's not a way I've conceptualized it before, and I think it's fundamentally very helpful that method is your reviewer to kryptonite. But Imogen, so you're on record as saying all methodology is made up. Care to expand?
Absolutely. Look, some of it is being provocative to get a reaction from Tamsin on the group chat sometimes, but I do believe that all methodology is made up, just as I believe that most law, or if not all law, is made up. These are constructs, and they're ways of doing things that we then give a label to, and it becomes a shorthand, but then it becomes more than that, sometimes a way of exclusion, as Jessie has said. And so look, I think this is one of those things where we're actually all saying the same thing, just coming at it from different starting points. But my real bugbear with methodology is not that you have one, because of course you do, but the idea that there's some objective, truthful, right and good methodology. And I also have a science background, and I think in that background there is a justification for saying, look, there are some things you do in methodology that you should do because it excludes errors and because this is the way the maths works. But when it comes to law, to say that there is a right way of doing things and there is a wrong way of doing things, I think is inherently problematic, and I think it's inherently exclusive. And so that's why I say all methodology is made up, because when someone says to me, oh, what about this methodology? I go, yeah, but it's just a different way of doing things that you've given a fancy name to. And it doesn't make it necessarily any better than this other way of doing things. But I did say necessarily because I really do agree with Tamsin that one of the things articulating your methodology does is reveals your biases. So the product of it might be you get by review or two, that's great, but I think the actual purpose of doing it is it shows what you have considered and why, and often what you have not considered is the most illuminating. And to give you an example from my work, a lot of my work has rotated around general principles of law recognised by civilised nations. You look at the methodology that the International Court of Justice uses to find these principles. It uses comparative methodology, and it looks at European civil law countries and European common law countries, sometimes the US, sometimes South Africa. What doesn't it look to? It doesn't look to usually any other African nations. It doesn't look to Asian nations, particularly Southeast Asian nations. It doesn't look to Latin American nations. It doesn't look to Indigenous laws, non-state legal systems. And yet that's the methodology that is used but not enunciated, and it's showing biases in how we create and construct international law. So I do think methodology is important, but I also do think it's just all made up.
And yeah, as you said, everything's all made up. I think there's a wonderful line in the Fiona Apple song where she goes, he said it's all in your head, and I said so's everything, but he didn't get it. And that articulates everything about law and most things about society. It's all just made up. It doesn't, and as you said, it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. The other thing that comes with your point about people say, oh, this is the right way and this is the better way, feeds into the question around theory and the difference between theory and methodology. A lot of people, particularly in law, will subscribe that theory and methodology are intimately entwined and one dictates the other. And that's just like a crock of shit. Like theory is how you look at the world. Method is how you've done your research. Theory is the lens that you're applying to your source material to interpret it in terms of whatever you're doing. But you can take the theory and apply any number of different methodologies with the same theoretical framework in the same way that you can take interview-based, let's just go with interview-based methodology, or even doctrinal analysis. You can apply a very different theoretical framework of law to the same doctrinal analysis and reach radically different conclusions, but the method's still the same. So we also, I think we need to dispel this idea that what theory you subscribe to of law dictates what methodologies you're allowed to use. Method's a mechanical question. Theory is a worldview question.
But I think that methodology can reveal your theory if you're not careful about separating the two, or if you're not careful about not bringing that implicit bias that your theory might have into your methodology.
Oh, no argument there. I'm just saying that we need to stop thinking that the two are intimately linked and that particular theories dictate particular methodologies or particular methodologies dictate particular theories.
Right. So this podcast normally runs for between an hour and a quarter, which is not going to happen this evening, much to the relief of everyone in the audience. But I was just wondering if anyone in the audience had a question they wanted to put to the panel. We've never done this before. It might not work. This may all just be cut out and thrown on the editing room floor. Obviously, you don't have microphones, so if someone's got a question, they need to kind of either step up and ask or shout it, and I'll repeat it. Any thoughts on method from the floor? Oh, there's a brave hand. Please step forward. Round of applause.
Kia ora koutou, thank you everyone from New Zealand. I guess this is more general on academic experiences, but for anyone considering, I guess, a master's or a PhD, what things would you consider or what advice would you give, including, I'm quite new and learning a lot about methodology, but it can be a bit daunting, and how would you approach that if you're considering it? Thank you.
Fantastic question. I'm just the chair, so I don't have to answer anything this challenging. Imogen?
My advice would be get a really good supervisor. And I'm not saying that just because Margaret's standing over Juliette's shoulder, but get a supervisor who's willing to let you take a free path and not be constrained and not make you feel stupid because you don't know all the terminology. If you have that and you have a supportive supervisor who's willing to let you go, then I think that you're off to a great start.
Yeah, I'm going to build on that and say that your supervisor will make or break your PhD. A good supervisor will support you. They will take your research on your terms and guide you and help you and support you. A bad supervisor will try and make you a miniature version of them. And so supervisor matters more than anything else when it comes to doing a research degree. I would also recommend reading Douglas's blog post series on So You Want to Do a PhD in International Law. Even 14 years on, it's still relevant.
That's a horrifying number. So I actually found those blog posts extremely useful myself in my PhD. I think, look, I would definitely echo the supervisor thing. I was unbelievably blessed and lucky. I think you have to, even though you don't feel like you have the knowledge or capacity, I'm not saying you personally, I'm saying generally PhD students and master students, but what are we doing? I think you have to remember it's your project at the end of the day and you're in charge. And so if the people around you are not supporting that project, two things. One, you do need to be a little bit honest about it. Are they sort of saying, look, this just, here is a genuine, based in fact reason why this is absolutely not possible. I want to swim the English Channel while reciting Shakespeare and have a PhD in law. That's not going to work. There's that. But within the relative bounds of, the discipline, I think you need to have freedom. And I think freedom and creativity is where it's at, right? I think the thing that makes scholarship fun and interesting is the ability to be creative. I am such a huge fan of Jessie's. We met at Cambridge many years ago, but I've just always the way that Jessie thinks about law as this tangible human thing is really different and fascinating. And isn't that the whole point? Isn't that why we're all here? It's not just about what are the rules and how can we talk about those rules. It's also just about the experience of how these things were created and what was going on at those moments. I mean, that's the context that we talk about. It's not just the context of what was said in a meeting, but what was the temperature in the room? What was the table that they were sitting around? Who was in that room? All of these things provide, what did they have for lunch? All of these things provide really interesting context that can then lead to other things. So I think, even if it feels a little bit wild, I think don't be scared of being creative and just diving in, and don't feel constricted. It'll come. Mine came together. Yours will come together. I promise.
So just a couple of points off the back of that. It's all very easy for us at sort of mid or later career phases to say, just find a great supervisor. So the next question off the back of that I just want to illuminate is, how do you do that? Because that's one of those hidden curriculum things that isn't evident from the outside. So honestly, reputation, does your network include people who have done PhDs or master's degrees? Can you ask around about, what is the reputation of various people? The other thing is, any competent research degree supervisor will interview you. Use it as a chance to interview them. Like if they're having a genuine interview, they will ask, do you have any questions for me? And what is your style of supervision is a legitimate question. But also on that, it's your project. You have to have the kind of freedom to define it. I think this is something that my PhD students, sorry, Ignacio, who is in the audience, sometimes find a little bemusing or frustrating about working with me, is that I do try and leave students quite a bit of latitude to find their project and their path through it and respond to their approach to working, which I think has left some of my students who are admitted at the same time with this sort of schizophrenic vision of me as two totally different supervisors. Jessie.
So this is a good opportunity for me to revisit the first question I was asked about how I came into international law. Now that we're all on more familiar terms and I've drunk 2/3 of my glass of wine, I can tell you the real story, right? So I did my research. I asked people, where should I do my PhD? Who would be a good supervisor? I reached out to people I had done my master's with, and I aimed high, and I decided I would go and do my PhD at Cambridge, and I was very excited about this opportunity. But what I did not know is that Cambridge is renowned for a particular school of international law, which is quite closed off from the world, which sees international law as a closed system that is understandable by reference entirely to its internal mechanisms and does not need to look outside itself for validation. And I spent the first year and a half sitting in seminars going...
But that's obviously correct.
And so I'm still sitting here going, but why? But how? And so I felt so unmoored for the first sort of year to 18 months of my PhD, and I think I'm still recovering from that by looking everywhere else for international law because I wasn't allowed to look elsewhere during my PhD. So I'm processing it.
Well, if you don't finish your PhD without some form of trauma, have you really done a PhD? Have you done it right? Okay, Tamsin, do you have anything you want to come in on at this point?
No, I think I've said everything I need to say on this one.
Right, great. And with expletives, which is what we rely on you for, apart from method.
I'm here for the snark and the swears.
Okay. We all play to our strengths. So in wrapping up, we usually ask our guests a non-international law question. And this season we've been asking, who is one of your favourite obscure or underrated characters in fiction, and why do they speak to you? Now, I emphasise that our definition of fiction here is broad, and they could indeed be a well-known figure, but maybe you see something in them that they are not rated for. So, Jessie, as a guest, this one's for you, but also Juliette, we're dobbing you in because I don't think you've done this question on this season yet. Look, if I can confess to a love of the Eighth Doctor and have my wife have to point out to me that he is in fact an obscure character, even within Doctor Who, you can come up with something.
So this was the hardest question posed to me of all, because I can talk about international law forever with very little preparation, it turns out. However, if you have to take me beyond the confines of my narrow interests to the fictional world, then I really struggle because I'm busy. So I mostly read nonfiction because I can pass it off as something that might, be work related. So I had to workshop this with my family, who suggested many things like Sprigatito from Pokemon.
This is why you do law and literature.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. So law and literature might solve all my problems, but the wild suggestions of my children, I felt I couldn't get on board with a Pokemon character, or so grasping rather at straws, but based on the fact that she is incredibly determined, I went with Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service.
Okay, so I'm literally wearing Kiki earrings. This is amazing. This is such a synergy. We love this. We love this so much. Oh my God. I've got Kiki in one ear and I've got Gigi in the other because Gigi is my favorite. But okay, so This is genuinely the hardest question on the podcast, and every single guest we ever have always freaks out about it, and I'm currently freaking out about it. At the risk of majorly stereotyping myself, though, I'm going to ask, has anyone watched the movie K-pop Demon Hunters yet? It's the best movie ever. It was a hand. It's so good. It's so good. Anyway, there's a character in this film who is not underappreciated in the community of people who have watched the film. It's the Blue Tiger and the Little Magpie Guy. I commend this film to you. It's full of absolute bangers in terms of songs. Everyone who watches it becomes obsessed with it. And this Blue Tiger is a character for the ages, like an instant hit, but beautifully rendered as well, based on traditional Korean folk art, and really, really lovely. So that's the character. His official name is Derpy Tiger. The creators have named him Derpy Tiger, so that's who I would recommend.
And finally, Douglas, for those of us who aren't present at the live recording, what are you wearing?
Right, so during the conference, because I thought introducing a keynote speaker was a reasonably serious thing, I wore what I think of as the good blue three-piece suit and Bengal stripe, pinstripe shirt and a bow tie decorated with anchors. But at the moment, I am wearing brown brogues, green corduroy trousers, a green velvet bow tie with a white shirt. But I hope it will generally be agreed that the pièce de résistance is sewing project number 11. So this is the 11th thing I've sewed in my life, and it is a 19th century style shawl-collared waistcoat made from green, gold and orange paisley brocade.
Excellent, and I'm pretty certain that is all we have time for.
Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.